They say some ideas are like comets. They appear once in a lifetime, blazing through the dark sky of history, leaving behind a trail of fire that never quite fades. Karl Marx was one of those comets, born not just into a century, but into a storm, a world trembling under the weight of change, the factories, the machines, the noise of new empires rising from smoke and steel. In that noise, he listened for something deeper, a rhythm beneath progress, the heartbeat of ordinary lives, those who built the world but owned nothing of it. He wasn't born to rule or to conquer. He was born to question, and that made him dangerous. To some, he was a prophet. To others, a heretic. But to history, he became a mirror, reflecting both the promise and the pain of human ambition. His words, written in dimly lit rooms, outlasted the nations that banned them. His name, whispered in secret meetings, outlived the kings who feared it. Even today, his ideas drift through classrooms, protests, and quiet conversations. Sometimes praised, sometimes blamed, always debated. But beyond the slogans and the statues, beyond the politics and the revolutions, there was a man with a mind restless as the sea, and a heart worn by poverty, love, and loss. This is not a story about ideology. It's a story about a soul that refused to stop asking why. So tonight, let us travel back through time, to the cobblestone streets of Trier, to the crowded alleys of London, to the fragile pages of Das Kapital. And listen, not to the myth of Marx, but to the man who dreamed the world could be different. Chapter 1. The Dreamer from Trier. Trier, Germany, a quiet town of Roman ruins and whispering rivers. It was here, in the spring of 1818, that Karl Marx was born. The air carried the sound of church bells and market chatter, the steady rhythm of a world that seemed eternal. Yet beneath that calm, change was already stirring. His father, Heinrich Marx, was a lawyer, educated, rational, devoted to the Enlightenment. His mother, Henrietta, was gentle, practical, rooted in the warmth of family. Their home was filled with books, debates, and the scent of ink. The young Karl absorbed everything: the music of words, the pulse of thought, the beauty of ideas that dared to question. He was not an obedient child, nor a rebellious one, but something in between. Curious, intense, always searching. Teachers noticed his gaze, that quiet kind of seriousness that made others a little uneasy. He would sit for hours, reading poetry, philosophy, and history, trying to understand the invisible forces that shaped people's lives. As a teenager, he fell in love with literature, with Shakespeare's storms, with Goethe's dreams, with the human struggle written between the lines. Words became his companions, and through them he discovered the first seeds of a lifelong belief that meaning was hidden not in power, but in the heart of struggle itself. When he left Trier for university, he carried more than just notebooks. He carried a burning need to understand the world, to find its logic, its order, its hidden law. In Bonn and then Berlin, Marx wandered between the classrooms of philosophy and the taverns of restless students. He studied Hegel, that great architect of ideas, whose words would both inspire and haunt him. Hegel taught that history moved like a tide, through conflict, through contradiction, toward something higher. Marx listened and wondered if that same law could explain not just thought, but life itself. He began to write, poems at first, dark and filled with longing. Love letters to Jenny von Westphalen, the woman who would become his anchor through all storms. She was his equal in intellect, his mirror in spirit. Together they dreamed of a world beyond the rigid walls of class and convention. But dreams have a way of colliding with reality. The more Marx studied, the more he saw the cracks in the society around him. He saw how wealth and privilege silenced the many, how justice bowed to property, how progress came at the price of human dignity. He was no longer just a poet. He was becoming something else. A thinker shaped by the weight of injustice, by the pain of seeing the world as it was, not as it should be. In those years, his friends called him restless, stubborn, impossible. He would argue late into the night, his voice rising, his eyes alight with conviction. Philosophers have only interpreted the world, he would one day write. The point, however, is to change it. Trier could not hold him anymore, nor could the quiet corridors of academia. He was beginning to see that thought without action was only another kind of silence. And so the dreamer from Trier packed his notebooks and left the comfort of his youth behind, stepping into a world that would one day call his name, with reverence, with rage, with remembrance. He didn't yet know what kind of mark he would leave, but somewhere deep within, the idea had already taken root, that ideas could move mountains, and that the pen could become a revolution. Chapter 2. The Birth of a Rebel. Paris, 1843. The city hummed with the pulse of revolution. Cafes filled with smoke and restless talk. Ideas floated in the air like sparks, waiting to catch fire. It was here that Karl Marx arrived, newly married, newly exiled, and burning with thought. He was 25, hungry, intense, and impatient with the world. He had already left behind his academic career in Germany, cast out by the authorities, who feared his pen more than any sword. Paris became his refuge and his forge. Here, he met men and women who spoke of freedom not as a dream, but as a duty. Workers, poets,
philosophers, and radicals gathered in narrow rooms to debate until dawn. The walls shook with passion, with arguments about labor, equality, and the fate of humanity. Marx listened, wrote, and argued with the same fever that once drove him to poetry. But now, his words had weight. They no longer reached for beauty. They reached for truth.
He began writing for radical newspapers. His essays were sharp, bold, and unflinching. He attacked the hypocrisy of kings, the greed of landlords, the indifference of the rich. Each article was a challenge, a question, a call, and the world began to notice. Then came Friedrich Engels, a friendship that would change history. Engels was the son of a wealthy industrialist, yet his heart burned for the working class. When the two met, it was as if two halves of the same mind had found each other. They spoke the same language, the language of reason, revolt, and compassion. Together, they studied the condition of workers, the endless hours, the hunger, the hollow eyes of men who built cities but owned nothing within them. They saw that poverty was not a failure of individuals, but of systems, and from that truth, a new vision began to form. The more Marx wrote, the more dangerous he became. Governments read his words with fear. He was expelled from Paris, then from Belgium, forced to move from city to city, carrying only his papers, his family, and his determination. Exile became his constant companion, but hardship only deepened his resolve. Each new struggle stripped away illusion and pride, leaving behind something harder, clearer, unbreakable. He began to shape his thoughts into something vast, a theory of history, of labor, of life itself. The world, he believed, was not driven by kings or heroes, but by the conflict between those who owned and those who worked. Every age, every empire was built on that struggle, and until that balance changed, true freedom would remain out of reach. In the evenings, Marx and Jenny sat by candlelight, their children asleep in the next room. She would read his drafts aloud, her voice soft but strong. He would listen, revise, and dream of a future where their sacrifices would matter. They were poor, often hungry, yet they carried something richer than comfort, a shared belief that thought could change the world. By 1848, that belief took form. Together with Engels, Marx published the Communist Manifesto. It began with words that would echo through centuries. A spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism. It was not a threat. It was a warning, a prophecy, and a promise. The manifesto called for the workers of the world to unite, to rise not in anger, but in justice, to claim the dignity that life had denied them. Across Europe, revolutions flared and faltered, empires trembled, and the name Karl Marx became both hope and heresy. He had found his purpose, no longer the dreamer from Trier, no longer the wandering poet, but the voice of a movement. The rebel had been born, and history would never sleep the same again. Chapter 3. The Fog of London. The fog of London wrapped itself around the city like a heavy coat, cold, grey, and endless. It was the year 1849. Karl Marx arrived with his family, weary from flight. From Paris to Brussels, From Cologne to London, always running, always writing, always watched. The city was enormous, indifferent, and unkind. It did not care for dreams or revolutions. It swallowed the poor and made them invisible. Yet it was here, in this crowded maze of coal smoke and poverty, that Marx would spend the rest of his life. He and Jenny found a small apartment on Dean Street in Soho. The rooms were damp, the walls cracked, the rent overdue. Rats scurried under the floorboards. The air smelled of coal and hunger. But in that small space, ideas larger than empires were being born. Marx spent his days in the British Museum reading room, surrounded by books, by silence, by the ghosts of old thinkers. He read everything he could find: history, philosophy, economics. He filled notebooks with endless notes, calculations, and questions. What was the engine of society? What made one class rise and another fall? Why did wealth multiply for the few and vanish for the many? Each night he returned home with ink-stained fingers and tired eyes. Jenny waited for him with a candle and a simple meal, often bread and tea. They would talk quietly about the future, though both knew the present was cruel. Their children coughed through winters that felt endless. 2 of them died before reaching adulthood. The doctor's bills piled up, beside rejection letters from publishers. Marx's friends often sent money to keep the family alive. And when even that failed, they pawned everything. Jenny's jewelry, their coats, even the children's toys. Yet through all of it, he kept writing. He refused to stop. To him, the suffering around him was not just misfortune. It was proof that the system itself was broken, that human lives had become gears in a vast machine that cared for no one. Sometimes, late at night, he would walk through the narrow streets of Soho. He saw the faces of men bent by exhaustion, women huddled in doorways, children selling matches beneath the fog. These were not abstractions. They were the living pages of his work. He wrote to Engels often. Their letters were filled with struggle and stubborn hope. Engels, who now worked in Manchester, managing his father's textile business, sent what money he could. But more than that, he sent companionship, a shared belief that what they were doing mattered.
Engels once called Marx the greatest living thinker. But Marx only smiled. Greatness meant little when your stomach was empty. Still, there were moments of quiet grace, Jenny reading aloud from Goethe or Shakespeare, Marx playing with his surviving children in the rare patches of sunlight that slipped through the fog. They were a family bound not by comfort, but by conviction. And then there was his refuge, the reading room. The great dome above him, the smell of old paper, the sound of pens scratching. He would sit there for hours, unmoving, a man lost in thought. Sometimes the guards would find him still there at closing, eyes heavy but burning with purpose.
He was building something vast, though few could see it. A work that sought to explain the heartbeat of society itself. Every law, every war, every hunger traced back to one thing: labor, and the way it was taken from those who gave it. The years blurred into one another. Poverty clung to him like shadow, yet he endured. Because endurance itself became his philosophy. In 1859, after years of silence, he finally published a contribution to the critique of political economy. It was dense, complex, and unlike anything written before. Few read it. Fewer understood it. But within its pages lay the first stones of what would become his life's masterpiece. He wrote slowly, painfully, rewriting every sentence until it matched the shape of his thought. Sometimes, weeks passed before he finished a paragraph. He demanded precision, not poetry, because this time, he was not writing to inspire. He was writing to explain. The weight of debt and illness pressed down. Jenny's health declined, and Marx's own body began to fail. He developed boils and liver disease, but even pain could not pull him away from his desk. Engels urged him to rest, but Marx would only say, "If I rest, I rust." And so he worked, through the fog, through the cold, through hunger. His words became his rebellion against despair. Outside, London changed. Factories rose higher, the air grew thicker, the rich grew richer, but the poor, the ones Marx had always written for, remained trapped. Their struggle was his reason to continue. In the quiet corners of Dean Street, a revolution was taking shape. Not in shouts or protests, but in sentences and symbols. In theories that would outlive their author. Jenny once said to a friend, "My husband's life is a battle fought with paper." And she was right. Years of exile had stripped Marx of almost everything. His homeland, his health, his peace. But they had given him something greater. Clarity.
He now understood that to change the world, one must first understand it. Completely, fearlessly, and without illusion. And so he kept writing, page after page, while the fog rolled endlessly outside the window. Each word he wrote carried the weight of all he had lost, and the hope of what humanity might still become. It was in London, amid poverty and exile, that Karl Marx began to build his monument. Not of stone, not of gold, but of thought. A monument that would one day shake the world. Chapter 4. The Making of Das Kapital. The years in London stretched into decades. The fog never lifted, but neither did Karl Marx's resolve. Out of that long grey exile, a single purpose burned within him. He would finish the book that had haunted his mind for years. The book that gathered everything he had ever learned, every wound, every vision of justice. It would be called Das Kapital. He began each morning before dawn. The streets outside were still and damp, the city half asleep. He sat at his desk in the dim light, surrounded by towers of paper, books and letters. His pen scratched endlessly across the page. To him, the world was a vast machine, and his task was to understand every gear that made it move. The work consumed him. It was not simply writing, it was excavation. He dug through centuries of trade, labor, and law. He compared the wages of miners, the hours of factory children, the profits of merchants. Every number mattered, every word had to be perfect. He wanted not poetry, but truth. a truth that could not be bent by power. Jenny watched him from the doorway, her face a mix of admiration and worry. His health was failing. The boils on his skin ached, his cough deepened, his eyes strained. Still, he refused to stop. When his hands trembled, he wrote slower. When he could not sit, he dictated. And when even speech failed him, he thought in silence. Sometimes he would pause and stare at the window, watching the smoke rise from chimneys across London. In that smoke, he saw the breath of millions of workers, the lifeblood of a system that fed on their exhaustion. "This," he whispered once to Jenny, "is the true soul of capitalism. Labor turned into ghost." Engels visited often, bringing money, food, and encouragement. He was more than a friend. He was a lifeline. When Marx doubted himself, Engels reminded him why he began. Together, they read, argued, refined every idea. In those moments, their friendship felt like a small revolution of its own. Two men who believed that words, if built with courage, could change the course of history. Years passed, and the manuscript grew thicker. Thousands of pages filled with calculations, metaphors, and fury. Marx was unsatisfied. He rewrote entire sections again and again. The concept of value, of surplus, of alienation. They had to be precise. The world must not only read this, he said, it must understand it. Money ran out often. They sold furniture to buy ink, skipped meals to pay the printer. Poverty was their constant companion, but it never silenced them. Then came 1867. After 20 years of labor, Das Kapital was finally complete. The book was massive, dense, and uncompromising. It read not like a speech, but like a storm. Every chapter peeled back the layers of society and revealed the machinery beneath. When he held the first printed copy in his hands, Marx said nothing. He simply looked at it, tracing the black letters with his fingers. It was not pride that filled him, but relief. Jenny wept softly. She had carried this dream with him through hunger and grief, through the loss of their children, through endless years of doubt. Now, at last, it had form. The book did not sell well. Critics called it unreadable, too complex, too cold. But in hidden corners of Europe, in small workers' circles, it began to spread. Men read it aloud in factories after their shifts. Women whispered its lines in meetings beneath flickering lamps. Marx's words gave shape to feelings that had long gone unspoken. That labor was sacred. That exploitation was not destiny. That history could be changed by human hands. As letters arrived from across the continent, Marx grew quiet. He understood that Das Kapital was not an ending, but a beginning. The ideas were no longer his alone. They had entered the bloodstream of the world. Yet he remained restless. The first volume was done, but he dreamed of more. 2 more volumes to complete the system. He worked tirelessly to finish them, but time was no longer kind. Jenny's health continued to fail. The years of hardship had worn her down. Still, she refused to leave his side. In her presence, Marx found a fragile peace.
They would sit together in silence, two survivors of the same long war. At night, when the city grew still, Marx would read aloud from Shakespeare or Goethe. His voice was softer then, almost gentle. Between lines of tragedy, he would smile faintly. Even revolutionaries, he once said, must sometimes rest in poetry. But rest rarely lasted. The pain in his chest worsened. His body grew weaker, yet his mind refused to slow. His desk remained cluttered with notes, drafts, and letters. He wrote of history as if racing against it. Sometimes friends urged him to publish what he had, unfinished as it was. He shook his head. "No," he said, "the truth must be whole, or it is nothing."
Engels worried for him. He could see the end approaching, and with it, the risk that Marx's great vision would remain incomplete. So, he promised quietly that if Marx could not finish it, he would. The winters grew harsher. Jenny died in 1881, and Marx's spirit dimmed. Her absence left a silence no words could fill. He wrote little after that. Instead, he sat by the window, watching the gray sky and the city below. He knew the world would not understand him easily, that his work would be misread, twisted, celebrated, condemned. But that did not matter. He had planted a seed of thought, and thought, once born, never truly dies.
In March 1883, Karl Marx passed away quietly in his armchair. On his desk lay unfinished pages of Das Kapital, his handwriting still fresh. Engels, in tears, kept his promise. He spent the rest of his life editing and publishing the remaining volumes, ensuring that Marx's voice would not fade into silence. When Engels spoke at Marx's funeral, only a handful of people stood among the graves. The world had not yet realized what it had lost. "His name," Engels said, "will live on through the ages, and so will his work." And he was right. Years later, Das Kapital would travel far beyond London, translated, debated, banned, revered. It would ignite movements, inspire revolutions, shape nations. It would become not just a book, but a mirror, showing humanity, both its cruelty and its potential. Marx had once written that philosophers only interpret the world, but the point is to change it. With Das Kapital, he had done both. It was not a book of comfort, nor of faith. It was a book of challenge, a reminder that beneath every empire lies the hands of those who built it. And though his body rested beneath the London soil, his words rose higher than any monument, carried by the wind through languages and centuries. The thinker who had lived in exile, in poverty, in obscurity, had given the world a map of itself. A map written not with ink, but with the pulse of conviction. And as the fog drifted once more across the London skyline, the city that had once ignored him now held his legacy within its heart. Karl Marx had finished his battle with paper and won. Chapter 5. The World Awakens. When Karl Marx died in 1883, the world did not stop to notice. Only a few stood by his grave that grey afternoon in London. The wind was cold, and the ceremony was small. No kings, no banners, no crowds. Just a handful of friends and a life's work left behind on paper. Yet, in the quiet earth of Highgate Cemetery, something larger began to stir. For words have a way of living long after their speaker is gone. And Marx's words, heavy with thought and fire, began to travel. They crossed borders, seas, and languages, carried not by rulers or scholars, but by workers, dreamers, and rebels. In the smoky factories of Manchester, in the crowded streets of Paris, in the workshops of Berlin, men gathered after long shifts. They read Das Kapital aloud by the dim light of lanterns. They debated, argued, and believed. The book spoke to them in a way no sermon or speech ever had. It gave shape to their suffering and meaning to their struggle. They began to see themselves not as victims, but as the heartbeat of history. Marx had told them that labor was the true source of all value, that the hands of the worker built the world, even if others claimed its rewards. Those ideas spread quietly at first, then like wildfire. In Russia, young revolutionaries copied his words by hand, passing them secretly through student circles. In France, philosophers studied him with both fascination and fear. In America, unions began to quote him in their meetings, uncertain yet inspired. The 19th century rolled into the 20th, and the world began to change faster than ever. Empires trembled, cities grew, and the old ways of power cracked under the weight of machines. The Industrial Revolution had given birth to both progress and despair, and Marx's words had become its conscience. For some, his writings were a prophecy. For others, a warning. But for all, they were impossible to ignore. By the early 1900s, entire movements began to rise under his banner. Workers marched through the streets with red flags, singing of solidarity and freedom. They demanded rights, dignity, and a share in the world they had built. In 1917, the echo of his ideas shook the earth. From the streets of Petrograd came the sound of revolution. The Russian people, driven by hunger and hope, overthrew their old rulers, and in the aftermath, they called upon the teachings of Marx. Lenin, standing before the crowds, spoke of a new dawn. He said the words that Marx had written had now found their time, and though Marx had never seen Russia, his vision seemed to live again in the smoke and songs of that uprising. But revolutions are like storms. They cleanse, they break, and sometimes they consume. What began as liberation soon hardened into control. The ideals that had once burned bright began to twist under power. In the name of Marx, factories were built, armies rose, and empires were reborn. But not always in the image he had dreamed. In China, his ideas found new life in another voice, Mao Zedong, who read Das Kapital by candlelight and saw in it
the key to his country's future. Across Asia, Africa, and Latin America, people began to see Marxism not as a European theory, but as a language of resistance, a way to speak against hunger, colonization, and inequality. Everywhere, the name Marx became a symbol of rebellion, of courage, of defiance. Yet it was also misunderstood, reshaped, and often used to justify acts he would never have condoned. He had written of freedom, not domination, of equality, not tyranny, of human potential, not obedience. Still, the spark he lit could not be contained. By the mid-20th century, half the world claimed to follow his teachings. Statues rose in his honor, cities bore his name, and millions lived under systems inspired by his vision. But Marx's ghost was restless. His ideas were never meant to be frozen in marble or used as weapons of fear. They were meant to question, to provoke, to awaken thought. Yet, in many places, they became dogma. The revolution he dreamed of, a world of justice and shared humanity, was sometimes replaced by silence and control. In the West, too, his name lingered. In universities, students debated him with renewed passion. Economists revisited his theories each time markets fell. To describe the human condition, artists and writers borrowed his language. Even those who opposed him could not escape his shadow. He had changed not only politics, but imagination. The way people saw work, class, and history would never be the same again. And yet, in the quiet corners of life, beyond all ideologies, something deeper remained. In every worker who demanded fair pay, in every protester who spoke against injustice, in every thinker who refused to accept the world as it was, there was a trace of him. In London, where he once lived in poverty, the world began to remember. His grave became a place of pilgrimage. Visitors left flowers, notes, and coins. Some came to thank him, others to question him, all to feel the presence of a man who had reshaped thought itself. Engels's prediction had come true. His friend's name had indeed lived on through the ages. But if Marx could see it all, the revolutions, the wars, the statues, the slogans, he might have smiled and frowned at once. For he had never sought worship, only understanding. He once wrote that history repeats itself, first as tragedy, then as farce. Perhaps he would say the same of the century that followed him. But he would also recognize that in every failure of his followers, there was still an echo of his faith in human will. As the Cold War divided the planet, his ideas became both weapon and shield. Some used his name to fight for equality, others to suppress it. Yet even in confusion, his words endured. And when the Berlin Wall finally fell in 1989, many declared Marx to be finished, the end of his dream, the end of his relevance. But time has a different rhythm than politics. Even after the fall of communism, his ideas returned in new forms. Scholars, philosophers, and ordinary people began to reread his work, not as a guide for revolution, but as a mirror for understanding. The same world of inequality he once described had not vanished, it had simply changed its face. In the digital age, as workers vanished behind screens and algorithms, as wealth gathered again into the hands of a few, his questions began to feel alive once more. Who creates value? Who owns it? What is freedom in a world built on profit? Those questions, whispered first in the fog of London, still linger in the air today. Karl Marx never lived to see his words conquer the world. Yet, in another sense, they never stopped traveling. His voice, once soft and exiled, still moves through the corridors of time. He had dreamed of a world awakened, and in that dream, perhaps he succeeded. For to awaken is not always to win. Sometimes, it is simply to see. And long after his body turned to dust, the world continues to see through his eyes, to question what it means to live, to work, to be free. The dreamer from Trier had indeed changed the world, not by force alone, but by thought, not by command, but by conviction. And as the centuries pass, his question remains, not in marble or monuments, but in the minds of those who still ask, what kind of world could we build if we dared to begin again? Chapter 6. Between Faith and Fatigue. In the final years of Karl Marx's life, the fire that once burned so fiercely began to dim. His body had grown frail, his lungs weary from years of illness, his hands trembling as he wrote. The man who had spent his youth battling ideas and empires now fought a quieter war. With time, with pain, with the weight of everything left unfinished. London remained the same grey city it had always been for him. The same fog, curling through narrow streets. The same cold that settled in his bones. Yet, inside his small study, surrounded by papers and memories, Marx kept working. Even when his health failed, even when his daughters begged him to rest, he returned to his desk. He was haunted not by doubt, but by incompletion. Das Kapital was not yet finished, and he felt time slipping through his fingers like dust. He once told Engels that every idea felt heavier now, as if the world demanded one more truth before it let him go.
Sometimes he would sit for hours, silent, lost in thought. He no longer dreamed of revolution, but of clarity, of leaving behind something that would still matter when he was gone. The world outside moved on without him. The movements that carried his name were growing louder, sometimes harsher. He read reports of strikes and uprisings, and though he admired their courage, he also worried. Had they understood him, Or had his words become something else entirely? There were moments when he doubted whether history could ever truly be guided by reason. He had believed in humanity's capacity to change, but he also saw how easily power twisted even the purest of dreams. Still, beneath his exhaustion, a small flame remained. A faith that the idea itself, the search for justice and equality, was indestructible. After the death of his wife Jenny, the silence of the house grew unbearable. She had been his anchor through every exile, every hardship. Without her, the world seemed colder. His daughters tried to comfort him, reading aloud from his old notes, reminding him of what he had achieved. But grief is a language of its own, and Marx spoke it in solitude. In those last winters, he found peace in small things: a warm cup of tea, the faint laughter of his grandchildren, the sound of a pen scratching across paper. He no longer wrote with fury, but with gentleness, as if his words were parting gifts to a world he would soon leave behind. Sometimes he would whisper to himself, half in memory, half in reflection. The philosophers have only interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. And then he would smile faintly, as if realizing that even after all the years, the struggle had not been in vain. Karl Marx passed away quietly in March 1883. There were no crowds, no grand farewells, yet in the stillness of that moment, the story of his life came full circle. He had begun as a dreamer and ended as one, still believing that thought could move mountains. And perhaps in that faith, between exhaustion and hope, he found his final rest. Chapter 7: The Echo of Ideas. When Karl Marx died, the world barely noticed. Only a handful of people attended his funeral at Highgate Cemetery. The wind whispered softly through the bare trees, and a few friends stood in silence as his coffin was lowered into the earth. Yet even then, something unseen began to stir, an echo that would ripple across generations. At first, his ideas moved quietly, carried by letters, pamphlets, and the voices of those who had known him. They traveled from one continent to another, whispered in factories, read in dimly lit rooms where workers gathered after long shifts. For many, his words were not just theory, but a kind of prayer, a belief that the world could be fairer, that labor could be honored, that dignity could belong to everyone. Years passed, and his name became a banner. Some carried it with devotion, others with fear. Revolutions rose and fell. Nations were born and broken in his shadow. His ideas were twisted, debated, celebrated, condemned. Yet no matter how much time passed, the core of his message endured. That history belongs to those who dare to shape it. Today, his image has softened into legend. Some see him as a prophet, others as a rebel. Some only as a man who asked too much of the world. But if you look closely, beyond the arguments and the politics,
you can still hear the heartbeat beneath his words, a yearning for justice, for compassion, for a world where no one is forgotten. That is the true echo of Karl Marx. Not in the marches or the manifestos, but in every quiet moment when someone refuses to give up on hope. When someone questions why things are the way they are. When someone dares to imagine that life could be different. Perhaps that is what he wanted most. Not to be followed blindly, but to awaken thought. To make us see that the struggle for meaning, for fairness, is part of being human. And so, as the story of Karl Marx fades into the calm of this night, let us listen to that echo, soft, steady, unending. It belongs not to one man, but to all who still believe in the power of an idea. If you have found peace, reflection, or inspiration in this story tonight, take a deep breath. Stay a little longer. The world is full of forgotten lives and quiet souls who once dared to dream. And we bring them back, one story at a time. Please, subscribe to the channel, leave a gentle comment, share your thoughts. Every word you write helps keep these voices alive. Thank you for spending your time here, for walking through history with calm and wonder. And until we meet again, may you find light even in the quietest places. May you dream, question, and believe. Because courage, true courage, never fades. It simply finds a new heart to live in.